What's it like to live as a female expat in Asia? If I come as a partnership, is an Asian woman going to predatorially steal my man? And what are the top 5 tips for women when you're moving to Southeast Asia? Well, if any of those questions or anything about the expatriate lifestyle are of interest to you, great to have you with me. My name is Wendy, and for more than 3 decades, I've lived and worked in 5 different countries in Asia, and I still live and work in Asia, now in Thailand. And today I want to talk about the idea of reinvention. But before I do, here's a little tip for you. If you're spend any time at all in a bar somewhere in Asia, particularly in Southeast Asia, you're chatting to the guys who are hanging out at the bar, within a little while you'll probably end up meeting at least 1, maybe 2 or more ex-SAS officers who can't tell you too much, but just assure you that they've really been there. Or have they? Because reinvention in Asia, particularly amongst the expatriate community, is a real thing. And I can't tell you how many guys I've had over the years tell me that they used to be ex-S or they are ex-SAS. And as someone whom I know who actually was involved in that type of work, that line of work, once said to me, if he was an SAS soldier, Wendy, he would never have told you, because we just don't do that. And that's probably true. So let's talk about reinvention. And before I go any further in the video, I just want to say none of this is coming from a place of judgment. I'm heading into the end of the 5th decade of my life, and I've reinvented myself several times because life does that to you, doesn't it? I mean, things like the kids leaving home, and, you know, that's a reinvention, because who are you then? Or I got divorced, so I'm no longer somebody's wife, or I've changed careers somewhere along the way, and that's a reinvention. So reinvention is very much a part of the human story. But in Asia and amongst expats, you do get, I think, a fairly high percentage of people who have decided for one reason or another to reinvent themselves, or they just discover that they reinvent themselves kind of by accident. So let's look at the many different ways that that plays out. The first and most obvious one to talk about is the idea of economic reinvention. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you've retired or you're working in a way that you can still get money, but you're living in a country in Southeast Asia, your money is going to stretch a lot further than it might in your home country. And that's probably the reason that you're considering being an expat, or you became an expat in the first place, or you're working in such a way that you're getting paid an excess because you're in a difficult position, or you're an expert in some particular thing. And that economic reinvention means that whereas at your home country, you might not have been able to buy a pool villa, certainly in Southeast Asia, for pennies on the pound or dollars on the cents, you're going to get yourself a beautiful home in a gated community with your very own swimming pool for much less money. And is that a type of reinvention? Well, yes, it is, because your lifestyle is going to be so much better, I want to say better, or so much more advantageous than it would be in your home country. And there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of expats become expats because they recognize that for their buck, for their bang, they're going to get a much better lifestyle in another country. And when they move to Asia, when they move to Southeast Asia, that is a sort of a reinvention of themselves. They've kind of jumped a ring, if you will, or jumped a tier economically. Nothing wrong with that, because there's no judgment there, and I completely understand it. As I'm getting to the time when I have to think about, my later years, I think to myself, and I get asked all the time, will you move back home, wherever home is? And I've talked about that in other videos. And the truth is that I probably couldn't afford to live the way that I do now in my home country. So I have reinvented myself to be slightly better off, because I'm living in a place that is essentially cheaper to live. And that's a form of reinvention, and there's nothing wrong with that. And that leads into the next part, which is maybe retirement, as I mentioned before. So lots of people, have a job that they've had for a long time, and their identity is wrapped around their job. So everybody knows you as Jan the accountant, and you're Jan the accountant, and you do this and you do this, and this is the way that you live inside these lines. And Jan the accountant gets to a point where she says, I think there's something else. I've always wanted to be an artist. I want to be a yoga instructor. I don't want to live this way. I need to change something up. These people, they're sort of stuck and I feel stuck, so I want to change. So they move as an expat to another country and they make that change. And that's their reinvention. And I know so many women who have done that, who have become expats for that very reason, because they just didn't want to be in that box anymore. They just didn't want to be kept in that place anymore, and they wanted to try something new for themselves. So they reinvented themselves. They became somebody new in a new country. Or maybe you've gone through a divorce and you find that things aren't the same as they used to be, and you're just kind of pushing shit uphill, and you think, okay, I've had enough. So I want to be somebody new now. I want to be the dynamic me that I've always wanted to be. And they move to a country where it's safe, where they can, get out and meet new people, where everybody's in the same boat. Other expats are very supportive, and they reinvent themselves in a new community. And nobody would ever know that they were Jan from accounting unless they let that go. So that's a whole new reinvention as well. But it's important to remember that when you leave behind your old self, when you leave behind the person that you used to be, if there's a major problem that you haven't really worked on, something like some trauma that you're dealing with, or something that's really upsetting you, if you haven't worked on that stuff, moving to a new country isn't necessarily going to solve that problem. There's that old saying that wherever you go, there you are. So reinventing yourself is ace. Look, I've done it a zillion times, but you do have to do a little bit of internal work if there's something major that you feel that you're moving away from. And I'm not just talking about, the old friends and the old house and the old lifestyle. I'm talking about internal stuff. And it's really important to understand that about yourself, because if you do move and it's still the same, well, that's because what you're running from, or what you're leaving, or what you're expatriating away from is in fact traveling with you. And that is something that you need to think about. But you've decided to start again. You've got a big change coming. You can be who you want to be, and you can do what you want to do with your new self. If you want to completely change the way you look, if you want to suddenly become a vegan, if you want to have an entirely new career. I know a chap here, very talented man, who worked as a hairdresser for, 40 years, something like that, in the family business, now works as a photographer, and a very good photographer. He was always creative. He just never had the opportunity to do that while he was living in his home country. I know people who've had, quite highfalutin jobs, and they've tucked some money away, and then they move to Southeast Asia and they pick up a different career. They open a coffee shop. They start teaching English. They, pick a thing. It's a reinvention of self. And a lot of expats really understand what it's like to reinvent yourself, because a lot of expatriates do that. And like I said before, it's part of the charm that you can actually leave those things behind. So maybe in the past, you've had some bad luck, or you've done some stupid things. We've all done stupid things when we were younger. I did loads of stupid things, and I have worked through that, and I've gotten myself back. And honestly, some people would be surprised at what a naughty girl I was. But, I reinvented myself. I cleaned myself up, got myself together, and reinvented myself in another lifestyle. And the one thing I would say about expatriate communities is they do tend to be non-judgmental, because everybody understands that we're all in a new place together. Your expat community becomes your new family, and it takes a little while to find your tribe, but when you do, you'll discover that everybody's got a past and nobody really cares. We're just living for now, and we're living for the future. So if you're looking to move to Asia or any other place for reinvention, don't be afraid. Don't think badly of yourself. If you're ready for a change and you want to make a change like that, it's a big change. Check out some of the other videos where I show you ways that might make things a little bit easier for you. And I wish you the very best of luck. Everybody deserves to be happy. You deserve to be happy too. So get out there, be the person you were always supposed to be, and I'll see you later. Bye.